Tonight we have two guests with us who have traveled from Portland, Oregon by way of the Twin Cities, and who were participating in a Transition Town convention up in St. Paul, I believe, and graciously agreed to make a slight diversion or deviation in their trip home to Portland to come to Iowa City and be with us tonight. Paul Cienfuegos has worked in our community, oops, Miriam, I blew it, has worked in our community and been here for 2 years, almost exactly 2 years. He came out to help the grannies when we were trying to figure out how to deal with the Dakota Access Pipeline. So he arrived here in October of 2015 and actually did a short workshop. Accompanied us to Boone, Iowa, where 9 or 10 grannies actually went through the futile activity of presenting at the Iowa Utilities Board hearing, gave our 2-minute speeches, and then were promptly dismissed. But it was wonderful to have Paul read through those 2-minute elevator speeches and advise us to talk to the people in the room about community rights. Unfortunately, we did not find a county of the 18 counties that were involved in that pipeline that were courageous enough to actually write an ordinance to block that pipeline that could have saved the entire state. So Paul has been very good and very diligent to keep in touch with us, to be part of our community rights working group here, to be actively involved and engaged in the dialogue that we've had locally about, most recently with the Johnson County Board of Supervisors, about confined animal feeding operations. But before that, we were working independently as a group on a pesticide ordinance when the school district changed their policy about spraying pesticides on the school properties. So we got busy on that. Fortunately, Joyce Miller, who's here with us tonight, was part of that task force, the Citizens Task Force, that helped the school board see the light and fix the problem themselves. So, but we worked on those 2 particular ordinances and we'll continue to work on those. But there are so many more things that I think our community would like to work on. And for me personally, I will, by way of my involvement in community rights, say that my goal and my dream is to do what Thomas Lindsay talks about, is to have a Bill of Rights for our community. To say what it is that we want and not fight what it is that we don't want. But to decide amongst all the groups that represent all of the people in this community to sit down, come together, and decide what it is that we want for our community. So that's my dream. That's why I've been involved in this. That's why I think, and I'm very much convinced, that this is the way to go. It seems to be a positive way to do it. I've spent my time in protests, I've spent my time at the pipeline, I've spent my time preparing to go to court, and all of that has been dismissed, okay? So we don't have any control there. I'm ready to do something that's going to make a difference. So I'm going to introduce Paul first, and then I'm going to let our other 2 panelists, who are also part of the Community Rights Working Group, introduce themselves. Paul Cienfuegos is a national leader in the community rights movement, which works to dismantle corporate constitutional so-called rights and asserts the people's inherent right to govern themselves. He has been leading workshops and giving public talks across the United States since 1995. Paul lives in Portland, Oregon, and helped to launch the Oregon Community Rights Network in 2013. Later this year, he and his colleagues in Portland will be launching a new national support organization for the community rights movement, Community Rights US, and Paul will become its program director and lead trainer. Paul became active in community rights movement in the 1990s after realizing that virtually all of the social change work he had done in his life was attacking mere symptoms of corporate rule. and we would never solve most of our societal problems if we didn't first tackle the root cause, corporate rule. Paul and his associates are actively working on a housing bill of rights ballot initiative for Portland, which is experiencing a housing emergency crisis. Regarding the rapid loss of affordable rentals and the fast-growing homeless population, he has a dream that Portland will be transforming its housing policies because of this effort. So Paul Cienfuegos and his associate is here tonight with him. I'm going to give you a little bit of background about Eva Hamilton. If you want to just raise your hand, Eva. Eva is a musician. She is actually will be and is the administrative and research coordinator for Community Rights US. She's a musician, performer, and teacher, grounded in a cultural anthropology background, and about to begin her graduate studies in counseling psychology. She's particularly fascinated by the intersection between consciousness, culture, and personal identity, and how our fundamental belief systems affect the way we engage with the world. Drawn to the community rights movement as a paradigm in activism that reclaims our sovereignty as we the people, she is motivated by the shift in consciousness necessary to place civic authority back into our own hands. Eva has been studying various healing traditions through the lens of anthropology and psychology for more than 10 years. She's excited to bring some of what she's learned about the process of personal healing to the healing of communities and nations through her work in community rights. I'm going to let Miriam Timmer-Hackert introduce herself, and then we'll begin.
All right. I'm part of the local community rights organization, and I used to be a member of 100 Grannies, but then they meet at the same time as the Coralville City Council, so I had to make a difficult choice. But I figured it'd be really useful to have an environmentalist on the Coralville City Council who could ask for using less pesticide, ask for planting more trees, and so I've been attending the Coralville City Council meetings, so I'm informed and I can make a good run for it. I have to say that even in Iowa with our state legislature like shutting us down at every turn, I think it's important that we get progressives on local councils, on the school board, on the county comprehensive planning committee and stuff like that, because they're often looking for people to serve on those committees, and you often can make some difference. And right now, any difference we make is going to be local, so we have a lot of work to do ahead of us here in Iowa.
Catherine Nicholson.
Yeah.
You can just pull that
Towards you.
Okay.
There you go.
I do not have a history of being an activist. I've lived in Iowa since 1969, but I was raised in the Jim Crow South and didn't know any activists and didn't know anyone who wanted anything to change. So it's been a really long trip for me, but I am interested in community rights because I really resent these power imbalances we find, and I just break rules whenever I can, because and the community rights movement really appeals to me.
Spoken like a true brand. Okay. I'm going to ask somebody to just begin. Paul, I think, wants to make some comments. Dawn is going to pass the donation jar again. I don't know how many people actually had an opportunity to put anything in there, but we're going to pass it again because this is our seed money to begin work in this community on some kind of community rights activity. And I will just give you the little caveat that today we met with the Mayor Pro Tem, and it was really quite an exciting meeting. Very encouraging, and tomorrow we will be meeting with the Board of Supervisors at a work session meeting. Paul will be addressing them, and later in the afternoon we will be meeting with another council person, John Thomas. So these are people that have expressed interest in community rights, and we have 4 council people that have actually attended one of Paul's workshops at one time or another when he's been here for his visits. So this notion of community rights is really something that I think they're beginning to understand. And I think that's a very, very encouraging thing for us as citizens here.
And tomorrow morning's meeting is public, right? So we
Yes.
can invite people here at 9 a.m. sharp at,
Oh, not here.
Not here, but
We will
yeah.
be at the
The Johnson
administration
County
building
Administration Building.
on
so if you want to hear my testimony at their study session and hear their questions.
Get
please
there
come out.
early if you want a seat.
And the afternoon is also, there's an afternoon public meeting as well they can
No.
attend? No. Okay.
No, that's a private meeting with the staffers.
But it's up on second floor of the building where you go to buy car tags.
In the boardroom.
In the boardroom. So did you want to?
So I could speak for a few minutes, but I'm mostly really interested in having a conversation with you. And I also want to say that I nudged the grannies to put local grannies on the panel with me rather than just being a Paul presentation, because as you noticed in the film, as you get involved in ordinance campaigning and organizing in the local communities, you become a layperson expert in this work. And I pop through every so often, but the grannies are, it's important that the grannies and everybody who joins the campaign towards making an ordinance happen in the city or in the county start seeing themselves as the local experts who can move this forward, and not assuming that an outside lawyer or an outside workshop leader is going to be swooping in to save you. That you saw one person after another in the film tonight who has become a leader because they got active and they learned the material. So as far as I'm concerned, these are among the local layperson experts who will be building this campaign, sitting next to me.
It was very apparent from the film that there is a lot of work involved in this movement.
So one of the things, I'm going to have make just a couple of notes or a couple of comments, and then we can have a conversation. I'm going to put up a sheet behind me on the wall to show you, because this wasn't well demonstrated. I mean, there's a lot that wasn't. Okay, that's a good point. Just as high as you can, yeah. Yeah. So, as you can imagine, I mean, the movement is based on some fascinating but pretty complex history of how corporations came to win so many constitutional rights, including corporate personhood rights. And the timeline in the back is just a wonderful introduction to that. And by the way, if you give us your email address tonight on the sign-up sheet, I will make sure that you get a link to that and some other resources. So give us your email if you want that. But the movement is complex, as you can see in the film, and there was an awful lot of stuff that really, I mean, even in a 90-minute film, it was pretty chunky bit of information, and they're just scratching the surface. Because this is a movement that is looking at this extraordinary history of the US Supreme Court granting one right after another to business corporations. Corporate constitutional rights were never given through state or federal legislatures. No governor or president ever approved them. No member of the public ever voted. This is what we call judge-made law. And if you know how the system of law works in the United States, judges aren't supposed to make law. They're supposed to interpret law, right? So this isn't even really legitimate that this entire corporate rule structure of law has even been established. It's fundamentally illegitimate. So people need to know that. And so I think that makes it even more apparent as to why we need to take it on and challenge it and dismantle it, even if we have to do so through civil disobedience. Because as the American revolutionaries discovered, the only way to actually overthrow the king was by withdrawing consent and breaking the law. That's how the American Revolution started. And the way the abolitionists and suffragists built social movement and ultimately won is both movements tried to use the existing law, as the film mentions briefly, and weren't successful. For example, the suffragists went to the Supreme Court decision. The 14th Amendment had just been established in, I always forget the date, 1870s or 80s. And the women's movement in the late 1800s went to the Supreme Court and said, you've just established the rights for persons of equal protection and due process to all persons, and we're persons, right? We're clearly persons. And so we want the right to vote.
Not property, not property.
Not property, right? You were the property of husbands and fathers at that point, and nothing else. You had no legal standing as women. You didn't exist in the eye of the law. And the Supreme Court said you are not persons. There's an actual Supreme Court case, and it's on the chart. So that's as far as you can go in the legal system, right? The Supreme Court says no, you're done within the legal system. And so what did women do? That wasn't acceptable to them. So they started voting in voting booths by the thousands, which was a violation of the law as a civil disobedience act. They were dragged out of voting booths. They were put in prison. Some of them spent months in prison. Many of them were tortured through force feeding up their noses. It was an amazing story. And so we're just a continuation of that. In order to drive new rights into law, sometimes you have to break the law. And so we're really no different in that way than other social movements. And the only other thing I want to say, you want to add
Well, I was
something?
just going to say that's so different from being taught in school. If you don't like the law, get it changed. Remember that?
Right, yeah, exactly. And how do you do that? And the only other thing I want to say before we open it up to conversation is, because it was so focused on fossil fuels in the film, that just to give you an overview of the kinds of ordinances that either have already been passed or are in the process of building campaigns in towns and cities and counties, is community rights ordinances that would ban clear-cut logging. Oregon's coastal county of Lincoln County just passed Oregon's first ever community rights ordinance just a month ago that banned aerial pesticide spraying on forests. Maine has passed a number of bans on water bottling from the groundwater, corporate water bottling. Pennsylvania, dozens of communities have banned toxic sludge dumping on farmland of urban sludge. There's an ordinance that hasn't been used yet successfully, but as mentioned, we attempted to use it in Boone County, Iowa, to stop the Dakota Access Pipeline. It's an eminent domain ordinance that would prohibit business corporations from seizing private land through eminent domain, because the way that it's been used is, again, a fundamental violation of our rights. Bans on GMO agriculture have been attempted in 2 Oregon counties, not yet passed. Many communities have banned, many townships in Pennsylvania have banned factory farms in the early days of the movement. And there's an ordinance that is currently in signature gathering, one county from where Eva and I live in Portland, Columbia County, that I've helped do some signature gathering for, that if they get enough signatures, it'll be on the ballot early next year, that will ban oil trains through their county. So there are 200 communities in 9 states that have already banned various harmful corporate activities and stripped sectors of corporations of all of their constitutional rights and enshrined into law at the local level the right to govern themselves. And of those 200 communities in 9 states that have already done this since 1999, when our work began, only 5% have been challenged in the courts. That's pretty remarkable. So 190 of 200 communities so far have stopped significant corporate harm before it came, which, as you can see from the film, is profoundly different than regulating corporate harm.
Does anybody have a question, or do you guys want us to keep talking?
Or a comment?
Yeah. Yeah. I know this is kind of overwhelming at first.
Yeah.
It's
true.
Yes, sure.
So are these community bill of rights, is that what you call them? Are they centered around environmental concerns?
That's a great question. So most of them are, but there's also a worker bill of rights that has been written for Spokane, Washington, that the SEIU is leading the charge on, along with CELDF organizers in Spokane, Washington. They tried to do, they collected the required signatures to get it on the ballot a year or 2 ago in Spokane, and the corporate association sued to keep it off the ballot and won. So now they're in a court battle to get it back on the ballot.
And exactly what was it for?
So most people don't realize that the Bill of Rights of the US Constitution doesn't protect you while you're at work. So when you walk through your door, you lose into your employer's domain, you lose your First Amendment free speech rights, your privacy rights, your right against search and seizure, etc., etc. The Bill of Rights doesn't protect you from your employer, it protects you from government abuse and nothing else. Most people don't know that. The Spokane Worker Bill of Rights takes the Bill of Rights and enshrines it into the workplace. Says that these Bill of Rights now are effective and locally enforceable while you're at work in the city of Spokane, which is really revolutionary in terms of workers' rights. The eminent domain one is also not specific environmental, and there's also one that I need to read that I haven't read that's about, maybe Eva can say a quick thing about it. It's about protecting of, I think it was designed for Muslims to be protected in their communities, right?
Freedom or right to be free from religious identification ordinance. So people felt threatened by an idea that they might, that was suggested by Donald Trump that they might have to at some point register their religion.
And
so
that
it was the right to be free from that was passed.
That was passed. Do you remember where? Or what state even?
I don't.
Yeah, I don't remember.
What state it is in.
I think that might be it in terms of non-environmental topics. Yeah.
The reason I ask is because the film does a great job of contextualizing the rights movements, starting with the Revolutionary War and going through some of the other movements and coming up to the rights. And because my next question is, one of the things we ran into trouble with people after the Voting Rights Act, there was very little enforcement when the 15th Amendment was passed, so the Voting Rights Act was supposed to put some enforcement around it. So with a rights-based movement, what entities are going to be enforcing
Is it okay if I just keep answering these? Okay. I'm not modeling this very well in terms of the others.
I can
Go
start on
ahead.
this one and then you can correct me if I'm wrong. If Johnson County were to pass an ordinance saying that we are going to ban plastic bags in Johnson County, then the Johnson County Sheriff could be in charge of enforcing that. If the City of Iowa City decided to ban plastic bags, then the Iowa City Police Department would be in charge of enforcing that. So it really does come down to that big issue that, the state has said that the county has no right to ban confined animal feeding operations, and so the state police would be attempting to enforce state law, and the Johnson County Sheriff would be enforcing Johnson County law, Johnson County ordinance, which is obviously in that state regulation box that everybody knows that state law oversees county law. Although when you think about it, why is that? Why do we do it that way? And as a lawyer, I remember the frustration of saying, all 50 states have their own laws. This is insane. We have to learn 50 sets of laws. If you live in the Quad Cities, you have to learn both Iowa and Illinois law, and they can be exactly opposite, or, and it was very confusing, and it gets even worse if you think about there's 99 counties in Iowa, and I can see that 99 different minimum wages is a bit of a hassle. But you know what, corporations, if you want to be in all 99 counties, then maybe you should, consider that it's more expensive to live in Johnson County. We need a higher minimum wage.
The other way that the community rights movement is tackling this enforcement issue, I think, is really creative. There are now a handful of the most recent ordinances passed, starting with Grant Township, Pennsylvania, that built into their, and afterwards I can actually give you the language if you're interested after we're done. They built into their most recent ordinance the right to do nonviolent direct action to enforce the ordinance as a form of legal enforcement. Yeah. And so, as Miriam just said, they passed that in Grant Township. So that means the city police or the county police will no longer arrest you if you're blockading the frack water dumping operation, which is what the ordinance is about, because you're enforcing with your body. And so it would force the state police or the federal police to come in. And so frequently, which is what we want to create a crisis of jurisdiction. We want to create locals saying the state is not protecting us or the feds are not protecting us, so we're going to do our own direct legal enforcement of our ordinances. And that's built into all of the ordinances.
So another place you see this a lot is with the places that have relaxed marijuana laws. Well, federally marijuana is still illegal, but it's kind of a community rights idea that states are like, there's nothing wrong with marijuana, especially for people who have a medical need for it. So states are saying, we don't care what federal law says, we don't care that federal law supposedly preempts state law, and we're gonna say that marijuana is legal. And so then, obviously, the state troopers, you know, the county sheriffs are no longer arresting people for using marijuana despite what federal law says.
But isn't it the fact, though, that, for instance, they just preempted a couple of things, collective bargaining.
Yeah.
And Chapter 20 was lost for cities, allowed cities to go in public employees.
Is that Iowa?
Yeah,
Just
that was
lost collective
horrible.
bargaining.
It-
Oh my gosh.
The last Iowa legislative session was just god-awful.
What mitigates the preemptive power of the state is, I mean, I understand you're saying let's bring these things to a head, but then how do we go to that part?
Yeah, to some degree, we need to challenge that in court. You know, we need to have our school board go ahead and bargain with our teachers union about health care, which is supposedly illegal now by state law, and that they are not allowed to do that even if they want to. And we take that ridiculous law to court and challenge it. And another way would be for Johnson County to pass an ordinance saying, in Johnson County, it is okay for school boards. In fact, we say that school boards should bargain with the school unions on this.
Yeah, I want to stretch a little bit beyond where Miriam is and say that all of our ordinances structurally challenge state preemption and Dillon's rule on corporate rights, so that even though the state has passed a law saying you're not allowed to ban plastic bags or you have to bring your minimum wage back down or whatever, within the framework of a community rights strategy, you would go ahead and you would pass the law anyway, and you would take them on, and if you were sued, you were sued. But the idea is we need to stop being afraid of lawsuits and start protecting our health and welfare, you know, properly at the local level. So in a way, what we are, I mean, what the community rights movement is it's a movement of municipalities that are no longer afraid of being sued. And that is the main barrier for most local governments to do what they want to do, is a fear of being sued. And so the culture shift work is really an essential part of this. These are not just legal campaigns. In fact, if you're launching a city or county community rights campaign in the near future here, you know, 90+% of you are going to be doing public education and culture shift teaching, and a very small percentage of you are going to have to do much legal stuff. This is really about how we shift our minds so that we start recognizing that in a fully embodied way, we the people, and we're not going to allow our state or federal government to say, no, you're not allowed to protect your own health and welfare where you live. That becomes enough of an outrage here that we shift the way that we operate as human beings, and that collectively we stop acting fearful. Because I mean, look at the ecological and social reality of where we are at this point in the United States, right? It's because there's so much fear in the culture that we're not rising up and acting, exercising our power and authority as we the people.
That's why I really like the little anecdote about Wells Township in Pennsylvania, a township that was primarily small farmers. When all the CAFOs down in North Carolina got flooded after a hurricane, then all these corporate animal confinement people wanted to move to Pennsylvania. And in Wells Township, they were working with CELDEF about banning CAFOs in their township. And what it came down to was CELDEF said if we write a strong enough ordinance about this, it'll be illegal. And the farmers all said, we'd rather go to jail than have it here. So they did it, and I don't think they were challenged. I think they're one of the 190 that has held.
Yeah, 20 Pennsylvania rural conservative communities banned factory farms, and none of them were sued.
So I think that's an important thing that doesn't come out very well in the documentary that we just saw, is that, you know, there's always this worry about litigation and about being sued. But, you know, we heard the woman say, sue me. Sue me, I don't want my child to die. I don't want my child to die from some disease that's going to be caused by the pollution that's happening in our county. And we know it's there. We know it's been there. We just don't know to what degree, and we never will know if we don't get involved. I think that we talked about that a little bit, but the other piece that kind of came up in that discussion in Pittsburgh even, you know, the chairman of the council is saying, wow, we did it. Now we're all going, holy cow, what have we done? What have we done? You know, what have we done? How much power do we really have now? It's just got to be extremely empowering to know that your voice does matter now. It's not, you know, it's not a matter of people just telling you it doesn't. We don't care what you think.
We also need to mention that the local community rights group has been working on ordinances. Miriam and Mary Beth have both been involved. I haven't, so why don't you tell us what the status is and what the ordinances are about?
If you guys have been involved in local Johnson County politics, you know that we have 5 great supervisors, 5 out of 5, who really care about the environment and want to protect the environment here in Johnson County. And I think we can make a good argument that Johnson County is not like the other 99 counties in Iowa, and that we have a lot of people living here. And in some of the counties in Iowa, you have like seriously 6,000 people, 7,000 people. You know, 7,000 people versus confined animal feeding operations, you know, there's probably plenty of room in that county where there aren't very many people living. But Johnson County has a very high quality of life. We have a lot of people who like to come and live here, people who like to live here and who don't necessarily want to live by huge scale, 2,499 confined hogs. And that's just one building, and then you can build another building right next to it. And so the Johnson County supervisors have been writing the state and saying, we really don't think that the master matrix under the state law that says this is the only, you know, basically giving the county supervisors no control whatsoever about where these confined animal feeding operations go. We don't think this is fair, we don't think this is right. And they have joined the list of counties, 11, 13 counties that have said, we need to put a state moratorium on allowing new CAFOs until we have a master matrix that makes more sense, that protects people, that protects property values of other neighbors. And so it's something that they're working on now as part of the comprehensive planning committee, the comprehensive planning process. That they got a lot of feedback. They got a lot of support for the idea that we want renewable energy, we want a clean environment, we don't want water pollution, we don't want CAFOs. And so the Johnson County supervisors are now trying to figure out what's the best way to enforce that. And we're going to encourage them tomorrow morning to consider saying, let's give nature some rights, let's take away some corporate rights, and let's say we're going to ban CAFOs and you can sue us. Yeah.
We have enough.
But haven't you already submitted
a draft ordinance banning CAFOs?
Right,
yes.
and we you know, when we first approached the county supervisors, we didn't know how much they knew, but I attended a work session a year ago, exactly a year ago, maybe to the date almost, on the advice of a granny who is also the Johnson County supervisor. She said, you need to come to the meeting tomorrow morning. We're having a meeting and we're going to talk about CAFOs and you need to be there. Well, I went and it was a work session. So generally at a work session, the supervisors are discussing topics and you're allowed to sit in the gallery, but you're not necessarily allowed to give any opinions or to talk. I was the only person sitting in the gallery, so there I was sitting in my green shirt with my poster on CAFOs. And they invited me to come to the podium and just tell them why I was there. So I did, and consequently they asked me to come back next week and bring a lot of other grannies with me, because this is a very important issue where public opinion is very important. And as we heard today at lunch from one of the city councilmen that we talked to, I need to hear from people. I need to hear from the people. If I hear something from the people, I'm going to do something about it. If I don't hear from the people, I'm not going to do, you know, I'm not going to be aware of the problem. I'm not even going to be aware of the need. So that's our responsibility. And I think for a long time we've been comfortable sitting comfortably in our homes, not paying attention, and maybe not even opening our mouths and objecting. But the CAPO issue is a very sensitive issue. We live in a state where people make their living by raising crops and raising animals, and it's something that's very sensitive, and it's something that's very close to my own heart, because I was involved with a family that raised animals, and I've seen 3 generations, now the 4th generation beginning to do the same thing, and it's a big concern to me. Fortunately, they live in Henry County. They're far away. They're far away. But there's a lot of illness in that family. There's a lot of illness in that community. And they don't make the connection between these operations and their own health.
CAPO stands for Confined Animal Feeding Operation.
Right. And if you've never seen one or smelled one, just go south on 218 on the Avenue of the Saints, 218. And when you get across the line between Washington County and Henry County, just open your windows. And look to the right and look to the left, and that's what you'll see. Anyway, I don't know that we really need to talk about the pesticide ordinance, because that was something we worked on. It was our first effort. We had a sample ordinance that Paul had given us from another state. And as I said, fortunately, the issue resolved itself. The process worked there because enough people were outraged, enough people raised their voices and said, this is not right that you are spraying pesticides on the playgrounds where the children are playing. And it was a contractual change. There were things that had happened, and it seemed to me just to be kind of a mess. Joyce, speak to that.
Yeah, Joyce is the one that
Joyce was on the task force. She
Yeah.
kept us informed.
It has not entirely gone away. They have
Inside the school.
restricted a lot of their spraying, but they still insist that football fields and sports fields have to be manicured in a certain way, and the only way of doing that is using herbicides and pesticides. So that is a playing field that they want absolute perfection so that nobody gets injured. We don't want any of the players to be injured, but if you're playing football and you get ground into the
Other than being poisoned, right?
turf grass,
But that doesn't count as an injury.
you can't actually see it, and so we've still got some work to do.
Well, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Well, and I had pointed out to the Grannies a couple years ago that Arcata, California, where I used to live many years ago, has a formal policy that none of their public school grounds, none of their parks, none of their playing fields there's no poison. There's 0 poison allowed on any of them. These are all public. They're public football and baseball, etc. fields are all perfectly fine without poison, and it's been the law there for many years. And Arcata's probably not the only place in the country where that has such a law. So I would encourage you all to keep pushing and pointing out these other communities that are doing just fine without poison.
Other questions, other concerns, or other issues that were brought up? Sally?
When I look around the room, it seems kind of bent towards one direction, or there's not a whole lot of younger people here. There's more women than men, and I'm just wondering what else do we need?
Really white?
It's very white.
What else do we need to be in this room, or in the proverbial room?
Conservatives.
And
The vast
actually,
majority of the 200 communities that have passed these are rural conservative communities.
because this is about local government, and the one thing that I read on a list of why you should vote Republican that I actually agreed with is that the grassroots level, where you can actually talk in person with your elected representatives, where you can serve on the committees, where there isn't so much money involved, that's the best level of government, and that's where a lot of decisions should be made, and I agree with that. And so I'm kind of confused by a Republican government in the Iowa state that has taken all of these decisions away from us.
Except for the fact that they didn't do it on their own. You know, they had help.
Yeah.
They had a lot of help, a lot of help.
Well, and let's not forget that Republican voters have very different politics than Republican state and federal elected leaders. Just like Democrat voters have very different politics, right? Who's the core of the Democrats at the voting level, right? I mean, we saw a Sanders insurgency that was really extraordinary in the last election. And state Democrat parties across the country, there are movements now from the left, progressive Democrats to take over the parties, but that's not represented among our state and federal elected representatives. The same is true for Republicans, and we need to not forget that. That, for example, 3/4 of Republican voters years ago were outraged at the Supreme Court's Citizens United decision. 3/4 of Republicans did not want to see the Supreme Court give even more money and politics in their decision in Citizens United. 75% of Republicans, 86% of Democrats in the national polls. So if we were not a divided and conquered country, right, where the left and the right mock and hate each other because the powers that be want us to and need us to keep us divided, when the left and the right had seen that poll 6 years ago, what we would have been, if we hadn't been so heavily propagandized across the political spectrum, what we would have done is crossed that so-called chasm and started talking to each other about corporate rule. That didn't happen anywhere in the United States, right? So both sides of the political spectrum are really need to take some responsibility for this. So, you know, the vast majority of conservatives in this country are opposed to corporate rule. You need to remember that. It doesn't matter that the Republican leadership is not. The vast majority of Democrat voters are opposed to corporate rule. The vast majority of federal leaders are not.
But the spectrum is broader than that. There's socialists, there's people way more progressive than Democrats. So
Absolutely.
we have to broaden that out a little bit.
Absolutely.
That conversation needs to include those people.
Yeah, and I'm not a Dem, so it's interesting that I didn't say that. That I forgot to say that.
Well, I think it's that question of, how to increase inclusivity basically, and sort of get our community aware of what's happening. So maybe, you can speak to that, or, what's happening in these other communities in terms of really getting people more galvanized, or, bringing in a real kind of a wealth of perspectives, rather than just, white, upper middle class or whatever.
Privileged people.
Yeah.
I think it helps to be rights-based, to say, not we're against this, we're against that, we're going to fight this fight, we're going to fight that fight, but to say we have the right to make our own decisions, and nature has a right to exist, and we have a right to clean water, clean air, we have a right to live on poison-free land. We have a right to not have pesticides sprayed right over our heads. And so sometimes it can be not just to be against everything that's going on, but to be for something can help. And then I really like talking about corporate rights, because it solves so many problems. It's really kind of exciting that I don't have to decide if I'm a women's rights activist or a union activist or an environmental activist, because I'm fighting corporations. If I'm fighting corporate power, I'm fighting for all of those things. I'm saying, I'm done with corporations escaping liability. I'm done with corporations being able to do whatever they want to their employees, violating the law and getting away with it because they're able to contribute so much money and mostly pollute the air and the water and the land, and pass off all those costs onto the state to try and clean up the water, or not clean it up at all. And so I think that that's a really exciting way that I'm hoping a lot of other people will get excited about that idea too. That instead of picking one battle, saving the whale versus saving the frog, we need to work on a really big level.
I'd like to just get back to Sally's concern and question, because it's something that I have thought a lot about. I thought a lot about it in the work that I did, the No DAPL work that I did to try to get that pipeline stopped. I saw an unbelievable number of people at the Mississippi River, which is where I spent probably most of my time and where I was arrested. But there were people there with their children There were mothers with their daughters there. There were people that came from northern Illinois, a county where I actually lived, for years and years and years, that drove all the way to Keokuk to be part of that movement. And there were young people. My perception also, having just finished another week at the state fair, or at the county fair, where we do a little corn pole every year, is that when those kids come up to that corn pole and we ask them, pick 3 things on this chart of 7 that you think threaten a livable future. We don't let them vote. They have to be 16. We don't let them put the corn in, but they can talk with their parents, and they talk to their parents. The number 1 thing is always clean air and clean water. I mean, they get it. They understand. But I get frustrated with young people who are living in a college community. I always just think there should be more activism. Why aren't these people outraged? Why aren't these young people out in the streets just really, literally raising hell? I think it's because they just are in that generation where they've not seen it, and maybe they're not with their parents and they've got other issues, they've got other things to do. But why weren't they thinking about it? When we stood out in the Pentecrest and we talked to them, they were concerned about the pipeline, if they knew about it. So many of them had no idea. Many of them didn't live in the state, they didn't really care. But it is a concern to me. How do we get these people engaged? How do we get these people? We saw them during the election. We saw a lot of them with the Bernie campaign, talking about things. But now everything's just all quieting. It's like the pipeline. It's underground. It's out of sight. No one thinks about it until the first spill, and then we're all going to be thinking a lot about it. So I think that's a challenge for us, and I think it's a challenge that we can meet. But you saw in most of these scenarios in this DVD that people literally went door to door and talked to people about the issue, whatever issue it was. And we need to do our homework, we need to get that done, and then we just need to start talking and have people that we talk to other people, and it will happen. I think community is ready to do something. And there are a lot of things to think about doing. So I do want Paul to talk about something that was in this, just barely touched on, but I know he and Eva probably have been working on it, is to talk about the community rights networks that are beginning to form. So we saw individual communities. We saw how in Pennsylvania, once one community passed an ordinance, there all of a sudden were 6 communities around them that all passed ordinances. So how does that movement spread? And I know Paul's been involved with it because he's talked to us about it. So I'd like him to just talk about how that movement spreads sort of regionally and where we're at, because we're in a great spot.
Yeah, so for example, in Oregon, where I moved in 2011, I immediately started teaching counties all over the state about this work and getting them excited about it. And 6 of the 9 counties that got active in the community rights movement in Oregon, I was the initial trainer for. And within a year or 2, we had formed an Oregon Community Rights Network. And that network is now in the early stages of writing a state constitutional amendment. Wow. Oregon and Colorado are only among a very small handful of states. I don't know if you know this, but every state has its own election laws that are completely different than every other state. Oregon and Colorado are among a very small handful where you can amend your state constitution through the ballot box. Most states are just the opposite. You've got to get your corporatist state legislature to do it. Good luck. So in Oregon, there is now a draft state constitutional amendment and early campaigning towards that. In Colorado, the Colorado Community Rights Network is a lot further along. They've actually successfully collected, they've had, I can't actually describe the details, and it's probably too boring anyway, but they've had some serious setbacks with legal challenges, but they have a finalized state community rights amendment that they've collected more than 100,000 signatures for, and then they were pushed back by the courts, and I can't remember exactly what that was about, and they're going to start again next year and start collecting signatures again. And what a constitutional amendment at the state level would do, is the way they've written it, is it would stop corporations from suing local governments that are simply trying to protect the health and welfare of the human and natural community, right? Because as you can imagine, if you have 200 communities that have already passed these, and they're all technically illegal, that's not a very sustainable way to build a movement. So we have to get to the point that the laws that we're passing locally are protected by law and not challengeable by state and corporations. And so that's the main purpose of the state community rights networks, and there are 6 so far, is to attack these illegitimate and unjust structures of law at the state level. And then it was in the final text at the end, once enough state community rights networks have been established, they form a federal community rights network, which was established a few years ago and has board members from all of the 6 state networks. And they are now having regular meetings towards stripping out of the federal constitution and federal laws those structures of law that give corporations rights, and again, that make local self-governance impossible. As Thomas Lindsay, the founder of SELDF, said, we need a new constitution. You know, some amendments would be a really great thing, but if you read the Constitution itself, separate from the amendments that were added years later, that's why they're amendments, it's a property rights document.
And
We need a new
slaves are
constitution.
property, yeah.
And states, yeah.
And the
They're
flavor,
still in there, the slaves,
Yeah.
3/5 of a person
Yeah.
in our current constitution.
the flavor
It's
is very
disgusting.
different from the Declaration of Independence too.
And, you know, let me just, is that good enough, or did you want me to say something
Maybe you might
else?
mention the other states, the other states here in the Midwest that you've been working with other groups on.
Oh, so that's not technically
No.
a state network, but I've been independently working. I don't know if people have looked at that thing on the far wall on the right, to the right of the timeline. Those are about 24 counties in rural Wisconsin, Iowa, and Minnesota, where I've led community rights trainings. I've come back over and over, and it's all color-coded so you can see how far the movement has gone. I've been to this region 18 or 19 times in the last 4 years. I will be back in September leading workshops in Spooner, Wisconsin, in Monroe County, Wisconsin, and in Alameda County, Iowa, which is the northeast corner county, and probably a few other places. Frac sand mine land, mostly, is what they're battling, and pipelines in northern Wisconsin, because Trump has put pipelines back on the map. And if you know anybody in the eastern states, I'll be leading weekend workshops in October, well, in a few weeks in Asheville, North Carolina, and in October in Columbia, South Carolina, and Athens, Georgia. And the movement just continues to spread. But in this region, over the last 4 years, because there are now 24 counties that have started a community rights conversation through my trainings, we're really changing the conversational landscape, you know, one conversation at a time through the region. And we've already had 2 extraordinary full-day community rights gatherings that have happened, where in more than a dozen counties have sent representatives twice now. And we're hoping to do a 3rd one in November. That's what you wanted? Okay. And I just wanted to put up one other thing on the wall to give you a reminder of our power and authority. I'm going to hang this one because it's really long and I'm tall. But thank you, Catherine.
I'm tall too. I'm really long.
And you're really long. You got it. So this is not Paul's wild idea of how the country should be organized. This is the constitutional structure of how the country is organized. We the people are the sovereign. We have rights. Sovereign means the authority to rule, sovereignty. We the people delegate certain responsibilities to government. Government is accountable to us, has duties and responsibilities to us. I want to just say one thing just about class and race and gender at this point, because we are such a wide audience. We're talking about we the people which was historically white property men. Depending on who you ask, that's between 1 and 10% of the original population, right? So we the people was an authentic revolution. We went from the king being the sovereign with authority to rule to white property men being the sovereign with authority to rule, which from our perspective looks kind of meek. Historically, that was a big step forward, but we also have to remember that this is happening on the backs of millions of native people being murdered and an African slave trade, right? So it's a very complex and contradictory history, right? So we the people now includes the vast majority of us, but women still are not protected as equal rights under the equal rights laws. I don't know if you knew that, because the Equal Rights Amendment was never passed federally. So women still don't have equal rights constitutionally. Felons don't have personhood rights. Children still don't have personhood rights. And there's probably other categories that I'm blanking on. And nature certainly doesn't have rights. But, so this is the constitutional structure, and if you put it through the lens of race and class and gender, we still have some very serious problems. But we the people delegate certain responsibilities to government. Government is accountable to us, has duties and responsibilities to us. One of the duties that we delegate to state government, historically and to the present day, is the chartering of corporations. So we don't understand this today very well, but corporations are state creations, state government creations. Historically, it was a privilege to incorporate, and that was really clear because the legislatures wrote at the state level, wrote the charters uniquely one at a time, and the investors had to agree to those requirements and prohibitions or their charter would not be created by the state. These days, it's more of a rubber stamp process where you fill out the paperwork and you pay a fee and you're incorporated. But you're still, all business and nonprofit corporations to this day are state creations. And it's really important that we understand that.
It's any state in Delaware to do business in Oregon, yeah.
And so, and I'm saying that because the state still has legal authority over business corporations, even though we don't think we do. In a way, in a sense, Monsanto and Exxon and those other giant companies' rights are a house of cards. And as soon as we start understanding that we the people have sovereign authority over all of our governmental and business institutions and start acting as if we have that authority, the house of cards begins to collapse. And that's why it's really important that people stop being single issue activists and start doing their work around the issues that matter to them through a rights-based lens.
Right.
I know I've asked a lot of questions, so if someone else wants to go, please do, and then I'll go. I appreciate this, breaking this down, because we don't understand the level of power we have. I still, however, think that we the people was contested by those narratives that you just pointed out. And I think one of the reasons we haven't resolved that narrative so that we understand what the inclusive, multi-issue-based understanding of we the people hasn't come to fruition yet.
Agreed.
Because we haven't challenged the privilege of apathy, the privilege of class, the privilege of education. There's so much privilege that those of us sitting in this room aren't willing to challenge yet.
Agreed.
And so we the people will be forged by the solidarity that's built from challenging that privilege. And until we're able to do that, we're not going to understand that actually it's the reverse. Corporations are on top, government is blah, blah, blah.
Currently,
It's going to stay that way until white middle class people in this country understand that work has to be done. I understand the frustration with these college kids, but they're inactive because they can be. Apathy is a fact of privilege. You know, so I mean, and I'm not just pointing the finger at white people. I'm pointing the finger at the need to wake up to where we're closing down to the we.
Yeah.
You know, let's get that we, and we can do it. But everybody in this room needs more skills than we have about how to dismantle racism, so that, you know, Standing Rock was not in that video anywhere. You know?
Yeah,
It was made before Stanton.
Right, but I'm sorry, but
You're right.
the whole historical context
Right.
of we needs to be brought, so that, because in the revolution, black people fought, and we got sent, and with those of us who fought against, you people, we went to Nova Scotia and got land. So, I mean, we understood what was going on. I don't want to stop my tirade now, but I just feel like we can forge that we.
I'm in 100% agreement.
We can forge that we. But let's take apart privilege.
We need to stop fighting among ourselves for the scraps and saying, oh, men should get more of the scraps than women, and white people should get more of the scraps than, it's like, let's start fighting the real issues. And the issue is that corporations have our government on a short leash. And so let's, we the people, say, hey, we're going to be in charge of the government, we're going to make the laws, and corporations are actually going to follow the laws, so.
And then we have this history where that was required. The corporations were our subordinates for the first century in this country. Again, most people don't know this history, but it's pretty fascinating.
It really is, yeah.
And were required to serve us. No corporate contributions to elections or to nonprofit organizations. Those were felonies against directors for the first century. No secrets, no financial secrets, no trade secrets. Directors and stockholders held personally liable for all harms and debts. No private property owned beyond what was required and necessary to fulfill your charter. Your company was dissolved after 10 to 30 years automatically in the charter unless you renewed it, unless the state agreed to renew it. The state could revoke your charter at any time and for any reason, etc., etc., etc.
And now we have all these LLCs behind names of things, limited liability
Corporation.
corporation.
Yeah.
Have you done any work in Texas?
Not yet, but I'm getting awfully close because we've got a couple of people in Texas who are getting closer and closer to inviting us. Yes. And I'll be going to Arizona soon. Yeah.
There's an issue with going to the surface and is really serious down on the border. Trump is about to put a wall through a national wildlife refuge.
Uh-huh. And across native land without permission.
Yes,
Mhm.
yes, and I'm
Well, it's all native land, but official native land.
What do you do? Where do we start to try to fight this?
Well, we always say we start locally, and you could use a community rights ordinance on that topic locally.
So it's kind of like,
Yeah.
the pipeline, you just need to find one county where.
Yeah,
where-
or a town.
One county that could pass an ordinance that
Yeah.
would block, would somewhere, like the gentleman whose property was right in the middle of everything, I mean, he wouldn't sign the easement agreement, but everything had to go through his property. So, one blockade there would, but it takes a lot of work to
Yeah,
get people educated.
there is a possible opening here where that might happen because they are treating the National Butterfly Center, which is adjacent to us, just as though it was government-owned land too. And they said, oh, wait a minute,
Wait a
we
minute.
can't do that. So that may be the place where we can start.
So,
As far as the
yeah.
refuge is concerned, they said, oh, this is low-hanging fruit. This is government land. We don't have to go through all of the environmental studies. We can just wait.
Why don't you overrule them through a local ordinance?
Maybe somebody do that.
Well, but that's what I'm saying. So bring one of us and become a local layperson expert in community rights and start teaching. And so just to do another plug for our new organization, Community Rights US. We have a flyer on the back table. Please take one home. communityrights.us as opposed to .org is our website. We officially launched in September, but the website is already very useful.
A lot of beautiful.
Do you two want to make closing comments at all?
Colorado state level has a nice website, and I bet Oregon does too.
Yeah, come talk to us if you're interested in getting involved and working on this with us. And even if you don't talk to us, get involved anyway, get involved locally, because we really can make a difference here in Johnson County.
And we need to start speaking to our elected officials. I learned that at lunch today. We need to talk to them. We need to not be worrying about writing letters to someplace that's not going to ever see them. We need to talk to the people that are in our community about what it is that we're concerned about and let them know.
Here, the squeaky wheel can get the grease. You don't have to have a lot of money. You just have to be really
Yeah.
noisy. So.
Right, and be persistent.
I'm wondering if any of the three of you would be willing to be a little more bold just in the next few moments about not just, it would be great if some of you would join us, but an actual bold plea for a lot more participation in this imminent launch with the city and or the county of community rights campaigns.
Well,
Because there are 4 or 5 current people and they need a lot more. Go for it.
Well, if you registered with your email address, you'll be hearing from us, right?
You'll be added to the list of now over hundreds of people who have been to these community rights presentations. We send out to that entire listserv when we're doing or working on a project. We get nothing back.
So not just people to receive the community rights working group emails, but to take leadership. So think about doing that, the folks who are still left in the room.
I think one of the problems is that there's no emergency like we've seen on the film. So many of those communities, they just had to move.
Well, I don't know. I think there are plenty.
I think there's-
emergencies myself.
I think when the state overrules what you need to do by popular vote, you have an emergency. You have a democracy emergency.
The state
And it's time to get
legislature was
active.
awful this last session. And we do have the dirtiest rivers in the country.
Well, we do need to also think about organizations that we belong to. And I firmly believe after doing some reading, that this is how these things happen, is that organizations of people get together and start to talk. And then you've got a committed group of people who sit down with another committed group of people on a common idea. And they start talking and they both learn about what it is that they want to accomplish. And then you just bring more organizations into it and let that information filter back out again. And I firmly believe that Colorado Springs has done some remarkable work in changing things in their community, electing a brand new city council that essentially is saving so much of their downtown area from being taken by a corporation. And it's very encouraging. It seems overwhelming, but all it takes is 1 ant or 2 ants to just keep moving, but we need more ants, you know what I mean? We really do need a lot of people to just be interested enough to do some reading, and then we need to pick an issue, and we're getting some ideas, so.
Mary Beth, why don't you make another invitation for one of the public meetings tomorrow?
So again, if anyone has time tomorrow morning, at 9 a.m.
Sharp.
Yes, sharp. The Board of Supervisors will convene their work session on the second floor of the Johnson County Administration Building, which is at 913 South Dubuque Street. And
if you can't be there at 9, you can email SUPS, S-U-P-S, at Johnson County and hit all 5 supervisors and let them know what you support. Let them know that you support fighting what the state is trying to do as far as not letting us control anything about confined animal feeding operations. Just let them know that, yeah, I'm with you, I'm behind you. I'm not going to not vote for you if you try and get some local control over this issue.
And that you want a community rights ordinance passed.
And remember that we do have an extremely, I think, curious and concerned Board of Supervisors. These people invited Paul to come tomorrow morning. They put him on the schedule and accommodated his schedule while he was here so that they could learn from him and ask him questions. There's staffers who sit in the same room and do all the grunt work, as far as making things happen in terms of policy and then presenting that to the board for approval. The staffers are meeting with him at 4 o'clock because they know they're not going to have a chance to talk in the morning either. So they're all very interested, like you. They need to learn more about community rights. And hopefully this DVD will be cataloged into the library collection for people to look at. It is very long. It just there are a lot of parts that could be cut out, like the beginning,
It's- yeah.
where we're just driving along, we don't know where we are, but, you know, it does make some good points, and I've watched it several times, and every time I watch it, I pick up something else that I didn't see before, so.
I think our sense of urgency should be taking advantage of those 5
Absolutely.
Yeah.
people that are in support, so we've got a groundwork that's already there. Let's build on that.
And a city council that's
Yeah.
also very willing to talk about supporting some of the things that they know the community is behind, and doing it in a way that is not going to be preempted by the state. So, thank
Well,
you.
that might very well be
Yes,
pushed back by the state, and you're going to push back,
that's right.
push
Well,
back.
They need to hear about
Yeah.
that,
Yeah.
and they need to understand that it works, so.
And please check out the books and the CDs and the timeline in the back that are available for you to take away.
What is the website that you had mentioned or had you?
Community rights.
Oh,
No, the.
Their
The
website?
email address,
yes,
soups@Johnson County.
I think that's what.
You know what, I should check my phone.
You can,
Right now.
you could just Google it.
Because soups is usually SUPES, but not in this case?
No.
No, okay.
I'll
Subs-
type it in. Yes, just SUPS@co.Johnson.Iowa.US. Sorry, I have it saved, so I just,
Maybe say it again.
SUPS@county, CO.Johnson.Iowa.IA.US. And it's on the Johnson County Supervisor's website.
Great,
so-
great website, you can look at all
Yeah.
of their stuff is archived there, all of their meetings are, audio and visual are on that website, the Johnson County. If you've not looked at the Johnson County Supervisor's website, it's pretty amazing. And you can watch the entire session there and without even having to leave your home.
Can I close with an Abraham Lincoln quote that will blow everybody's mind?
Absolutely.
Abraham Lincoln said this in his first inaugural address. So he said this in his first hour, in his first term as president. This country with its institutions belongs to the people who inhabit it. Whenever they shall grow weary of the existing government, they can exercise their constitutional right of amending it, or their revolutionary right to dismember or overthrow it. We the people. It's up to us.
Wow.